morning. I'm Robert Kelly. I am one of the pastors here at the church. So glad that you guys have come on out to join us for a continuation of our series, I've Got Your Back. It's also, of course, Memorial Day weekend. So happy Memorial Day, everyone. I hope you got all sorts of very cool plans and barbecues and parties and all that kind of jazz that you're going to go to. Of course, the air show. That was great yesterday. We did the air show. So that was, it's the Bethpage Joey Beach air show. Hopefully some of you guys made it to that. And just to really hope, this is, of course, the weekend that we set aside to remember those who have died protecting our freedoms. And so, many of you know a veteran or are a veteran. Some of you have lost a loved one in our country's fight for freedom. And so we thank you for your sacrifice. And I really do hope that at some point throughout the weekend you're able to give some time, some thought, some consideration to the many men and women who have allowed us to continue to live in a country of such great freedom. But it has not come without cost. And so this is a weekend for us to just remember and to reflect. So this series that we are in, I've Got Your Back, is a series dedicated to the study of character. And so we've explored the importance of character, the role of the mind and the will, central role in the shaping of character. In previous weeks, we've looked at the power of the flesh and how we can fight against the flesh, what that means, and define the definition of it and all that kind of stuff. We've defined character and started to look over the last couple of weeks at some key character traits. And we've kind of tied them into the Christian gospel, and that's what we've been working through for the last, since Easter. And I hope that by now you're coming to see that your character is always showing. You may not think of it in that way, but of course, even if you're trying to hide who you really are, it really isn't successful. You might be able to hide it from people that are far from you, but the people closest to you, the people who know you, they will actually know who you really are. Character just sort of oozes out of your pores. It just becomes self-evident. People who have known you maybe 15 minutes might know more about you than you were hoping they would know, because character flows out of you, even unconsciously so. That's good news, of course, in some ways, and bad news for us in others. But what it means for us is that genuine life change has to come from within. And it has to be fueled by the Spirit of God. And that's really what we've been working on and dedicating ourselves to over the last couple months. Today we're going to be exploring a central verse in all of the Bible from the prophet Micah. We're going to see that God has freed us from the tyranny of man-made religion. And He has a desire that we practice something far more satisfying than mere religion. See, our pursuit of religion creates a sort of low-level anxiety and angst, even an existential angst about the world, how we live in it and what really matters and what's really valuable. And if we are not living better than a mere religious existence, then we're really not connected into the fiber of the world, the way the world was designed to be experienced by us. We talked a little bit about David Brooks, an editorialist in the New York Times a few weeks back. Another line I wanted to highlight from his article, he said, "If you live for external achievement, years pass and the deepest parts of you go unexplored and unstructured. You lack a moral vocabulary. It's easy to slip into self-satisfied moral mediocrity. You grade yourself on a forgiving curve. You figure as long as you are not obviously hurting anybody and people seem to like you must be okay." You can underline that sentence if you really want to. You figure as long as you are not obviously hurting anybody and people seem to like you must be okay. See, that's about the standard that many of us set when it comes to having character. But you live with an unconscious boredom, separated from the deepest meaning of life and the highest moral joys. Gradually, a humiliating gap opens between your actual self and your desired self, between you and those incandescent souls that you sometimes meet. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to go try and find our religion. In Micah chapter 6, we'll be starting in verse 1. The background of this is helpful for us. This was written around 700 BC. Now Micah is writing this oracle, this prophecy, to the southern kingdom. Israel had been divided for a long time at this point in history. Northern kingdom and southern kingdom. The northern kingdom, because of their sin, had already fallen, had already been punished by God through an invading army. The southern kingdom was experiencing relative peace, and they had all of the trappings of religion. So they were still a religious people. You might say that during this time, the Israelites, they were dotting all of their religious I's, and they were crossing all of their ceremonial T's. And but in that form of religion, they had actually lost the heart of it. And so now they have the external forms, but they lack the internal heart. And it was such a neglect of the deeper things of God, such a boredom, you could say, with the ways of God, that God decides to bring them to trial. He's going to bring them to trial. So God prosecutes our self-centered response to His goodness. That's our first point there on your notes sheet. You can fill in those blanks if you're a new person. God prosecutes our self-centered response to His goodness. Which, of course, seems it can be a little aggressive at first, but I think it's a great point that we've got to be able to help people with their mistakes. We have to be able to point out a person's mistakes, especially if they're pretty serious. I heard a story, it's supposed to be a true story. It was about a young man, and he was home for the first time at his girlfriend's house to meet the parents. And so, this is kind of an important day, a big moment for him. He's meeting mom and dad, and they decided to have dinner. And so, here they are having dinner, and mom and dad, and he and his girlfriend are there. And he decides, and he's going to, kick it up here a notch. And so he decides during dinner to play footsies with his girlfriend. And so, after a few minutes of playing footsies, finally the mother turns and makes, direct eye contact with him, stares at him for a moment, and she says, that's my foot, right? These are the kind of mistakes you want to correct early on, as quickly as possible. God's doing this. He has a case against us. He's calling witnesses. But God, of course, doesn't call people. This is a thing you'll see in other places in the Bible. In verse 1 of Micah chapter 6, he says, listen to what the Lord says. Stand up, plead my case before the mountains. Let the hills hear what you have to say. Hear, you mountains, the Lord's accusation. Listen, you everlasting foundations of the earth. For the Lord has a case against His people. He is lodging a charge against Israel. Every once in a while, you'll find a text like this, where God, He doesn't rely on fallible eyewitnesses. He calls the very mountains themselves, the creation itself. You'll hear this in other parts of the prophets too when you're reading. And He's saying, listen, there is a witness that has seen it all. On the mountains where you did your idolatry, in the farms where you robbed your worker of their wages. The animals saw this. This is kind of the idea that He's using here. Is you can, for us it would be different. He'd be like, your house is going to talk against you. He's going to say, I call my first witness, your phone. I need your computer is going to be held responsible. Your tax returns. That's what He's like. He's going to call all of these. The creation itself will stand against us. And so God lays out His case, but He starts with how incredibly good He has been to His people. Look at verse 3. My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, and Aaron and Miriam. My people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, plotted, and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. See, God marshals some evidence. He has 4 proofs that He lays out before them. He says, first, it's the Exodus. You remember, you were a slave. So the very first proof I'm going to offer is that you were nothing. You were abused. You were taken advantage of. You couldn't even call yourself a nation, a people. And I saved you with incredible acts of power and kindness and mercy. I saved you from your slavery. That's his first piece of it, his first proof. His second proof. He says Moses and Aaron and Miriam, He gave them great leaders. people who would look out for them, protect them, lead them, provide them with wisdom and with guidance. Now they could be a people. They're no longer fending for themselves, but now they're going to be organized and they're going to be shepherded. They're going to have people who will help mediate their disputes with wisdom, following God's ways, instructing them, leading them into the presence of God. And then he hits them with this one, the Balak, king of Moab. This is the third proof that he offers. This one you got to get a little bit of the history, because Balak was a guy who lived in one of the nations, a king who lived in one of the nations, where Israel was kind of marching through their land to get to the promised land. And he didn't like this, because this was a massive horde of people, and God was clearly with them. So Balak, he realizes that because God is with the Israelites, I'm going to have to come up with some pretty creative strategies to beat them. So he calls on a prophet, Balaam, and he says, I'm going to pay you to curse this people. I need you to bring supernatural power down upon these people. And so Balaam tries. He tries at first to curse. God doesn't let him curse. In fact, he has to bless them. He tries again from another place. Same thing. He has to bless them. Every time he was called and paid by Balak to try to curse him, he has to instead bless them. God wouldn't let him do anything else but bless his people. He's telling them, you worried about all of the things you've seen. Who knows what the Israelites knew about this whole conversation between Balaam and Balak? Did they even know that this battle in the unseen world was going on? It doesn't seem likely at the time. But they were delivered. They were blessed, because no wicked forces, not natural or supernatural, could be raised against them. They're protected both in the physical world that they had been through the wilderness and through Egypt, and the supernatural world against even unseen enemies. And then he tells them, what about, remember, the journey from Shittim to Gilgal? And this is an important point for them, because Shittim here is on the east side of the Jordan River. The Dead Sea, of course, the Sea of Galilee, there's the Mediterranean up on the west side. And that was before they had had in any way set foot into the real promised land. That they had been promised at the time of Abraham that would be theirs. That God would bring them out, a great people, and establish them in the promised land. And the journey to Gilgal was the crossing of the Jordan. God said, look, I fulfilled the promise. I brought you home. I gave you a land that you had not plowed. I gave you vineyards that you had not planted. I gave you homes that you did not build. Have you forgotten this? I mean, this is an impressive list of things that God had done for his people. And this week, while I'm working through this, I wonder what his list would be like for us. I mean, I'm sure it would be different for every one of us, but there's got to be some similarities even. I bet there's a long list of things that God would start to lay out before us. I wonder if he would say, I gave you a great family. I surrounded you with people who loved you. I put you in a free country where you can worship me without fear of oppressive governments or any sort of real societal risk. Maybe he would remind us that he has showered us with wealth and riches beyond what most nations and people anywhere in the history of the world have ever seen. We don't have to worry about clean water. We don't have to worry about enough food. Most have way too much food. We don't have to worry about many things that people all over the world and throughout history have had to worry about. We don't fret about foreign nations, enemies laying waste to our homes. We don't even think in these categories most of the time. He might tell us, you guys have church buildings to pray in. You have an abundance of opportunities for spiritual pursuits. You have leisure time. It abounds to an incredible level. Maybe he would remind us that he had shown us the way of salvation found in his Son, in the life of Jesus. Maybe he would have reminded us that he saved us not only from sin, but from hell. I think he might tell us that I have done deeds great and mighty, and I have done deeds tender and kind. I have protected you from seen and unseen. I have saved you from sin. I gave you the Spirit, His Holy Spirit, to lead and to guide, to transform us from the inside out. Maybe He'll remind us that He secured for us the promised land as well, at the cost of His own Son. I wonder if He would ask us, What more do you want before you start living the way I have asked? What more do you want? So this is the second point there, we rebut God's charges with more religiosity. We rebut God's charges with more religiosity. There's a comedian, Bill Engel, some of you have heard this. He's fascinated by the dumb things that people say. And he's tried to create an art form in the quick-witted rebuttal. And so, for instance, a neighbor of his, he had a cement truck, a massive cement truck, spinning. He backs up into his yard to pour a foundation for a new stoop that he was putting in. And his neighbor walks over and he says, "So you're pouring concrete?" Of course, he was like, "Yeah, see the truck, that's what you want to say." Of course, most of us say, "Yes." He said, "No, we're making giant margaritas." He goes on, one day he's flying a kite with his son. And a passerby goes by and he says, "Oh, you guys flying a kite?" "No, we're fishing for birds." You pull into a gas station, a service station, you get on a flat tire. And the attendant looks at him and says, "Did you get it flat?" "No, I'm driving down the road and the other three just swelled up like this." I wish we could come up with all sorts of clever rebuttals for these kinds of things. I wonder how it is, do you think, that most people respond when God brings charges against them? Do we offer our own quick-witted one-liner back to God? I think that most of us, what we do is we ignore those promptings. If we hear something going on in our hearts, we just sort of like, no, can't deal with it, don't want to deal with it, don't really want to know what God was trying to do in my heart. I'll just kind of move past it, distract myself, and move on. That's a dangerous game we're playing because He's firing shots across your bow. He's trying to get your attention. He's got lots of tools to do that. It's best to listen when we know that He's doing a work in our hearts. That's what the prophets themselves were doing. They were designed to startle people awake, to create an environment where they would see and hear and listen finally to what God was trying to communicate. And maybe you don't ignore it. Then if not, many of us were shocked by it. God has a claim against me? What? How? But look, I've done so much. I mean, how can He expect so much? How can He be so demanding? What have I really done that He would find fault? So maybe we'll even defend ourselves, or we'll call our own witnesses. Well, you should ask so-and-so, and I'm not as bad as this guy, and we create all of these ways of trying to answer this. I think sometimes what we really end up doing is we try to, what I'm terming, we ramp up our religion. We want to make sure that we're still in a good place, so we ramp up our religion. I think this is what went on with the Israelites throughout this time period. Look at verse 6. He says, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before Him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" It's like the lunacy that he's getting to at this point, all of these questions that he's asking. Is that what God wants from me? Some impossible sacrifices? I can't even understand it. How could He be so demanding? How could He want all of this? See, what they're saying is, the questions betray that they thought that their religion would be enough. So they can't understand how they can ramp up even more of their religion. One more sacrifice, even more expensive gifts that we bring. And God's saying, I know you thought it would be enough. It isn't. It isn't enough. And they were stunned. God's unhappy with me? What more can I do? I think we often do this. We think that our religion will be enough, but it isn't. Maybe we'll go back to church, we'll do penance, we'll go to confession, whatever it might be. God's saying, it will never be enough. But we try, man. We try. We try to earn God's good graces by doing religious things. Going to church, we're going to go sing some songs, we're going to receive the Eucharist. Maybe we'll get baptized. And maybe we'll get baptized again in case it didn't stick the first time, And maybe we'll get our kids confirmed and, we'll just make sure. Maybe I'll even tithe, We'll give 1/10 of my income. That's got to be enough, right? God says, no, that's not enough, not even close. Now listen, all these things, many of them might be fine, they might be good, some might even be expected of followers of Christ. But without the right heart attitude, it is just dead or dying religion. The same warning, the same trial that he brought against the Israelites might be laid at us as well. The third point is that God's verdict is for us to find our true religion. God's verdict is for us to find our true religion. Verse 8. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with your God. He talks about how it is we are, what God requires of us. In that passage in Deuteronomy 4, he says, but if from there you seek the Lord your God, you will find him if you seek him with all your heart and with all your soul. See that idea of seeking, how the intensity of seeking? That's what we're supposed to do to God. But when it says, he has shown you, O man, what the Lord requires of you, it's the same idea. It's what God is seeking from you. We're called to be seeking him with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. Well, God is seeking something from you. With that kind of vigor, with that kind of interest, he is seeking not simply goodness to make him happy, but a goodness in you that is rooted in his goodness. One that will overflow is as a reflection of his heart of goodness. That's what he's saying. I've shown you. It's made clear to you. It's in the Word. It's in the prophets. What is required? What is good? All of these things, they all come to point to this idea of what true religion looks like. So that's what we ask ourselves. What does it look like? In our lives today, what does it look like? And he starts with act justly. Act justly. That's the first and foremost. You have to act justly. This is a tough one because when we hear the word justice, I think we catch a sliver of it. So if I were to say to you, well, justice was served, or we demand justice. Usually, what we're referring to is that a wrongdoer is properly punished, right? So if justice was served, it means that bad person got what they were doing. So society has been rectified, punishment has been meted out. This is a good day for society because justice has been done. We have a Department of Justice that seeks the punishment of the wrongdoer. That is a part of justice, but it is a small sliver of biblical justice. When you understand, when you come to read through the scriptures, you'll start to see another idea, a more dominant and even profound idea of justice emerging. For example, it shows up in Deuteronomy 24. He says, do not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I command you to do this. When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheep, do not go back and get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember, when you were slaves in Egypt, that is why I commanded you to do this. 3 times, 3 different examples, all saying the same thing. You can't do that. When you're doing this, make sure you remember the poor, the fatherless, and when you do this, make sure you remember the fatherless, the poor, the widow. And when you're doing this, it's all the same thing. He's got to tell us 3 times. Why do you think he has to tell us 3 times? When you repeat yourself 3 times, think about why. Because they're not getting it. You're a parent. You're telling your kid, I told you that 3 times. That's what God's doing here. He's like, I'm going to tell you 3 times. I'm going to repeat it. You're going to wonder why I repeated myself over and over. It's because you're not doing it. I think this is an important part for us to get a picture, the beginning of a picture of what justice for God really looks like. The foreigners, the poor, the slaves. Well, we're not slaves that most of us have exposure to in our day and age, and at least in our country. Then put in there the minimum wage class, if that helps you understand who we'd be talking about here. The lower socioeconomic strata of society, the minimum wage class. They say orphans, we can talk of foster care. They speak of widows, we can add to that. We have our own, we can add to that the elderly. We can also talk about those on public assistance. This was God's safety net, his economic, social safety net he was creating in our very passage. So we can talk about those on public assistance. We can talk about anyone who's easily taken advantage of throughout the scriptures. You know, how often are prisoners in the news right now? Easily taken advantage of by the institutions designed to bring them to justice. But have we? You can add the prisoners. You can add the sick. You can add the mentally ill. You can add even our own enemies. See, if we cling too tightly to our stuff, to my standard of living, to my resources, to my time, instead of giving and instead of sharing and instead of caring, then I think God has a charge to lay against us. He has a charge to lay against us. We haven't really understood the true kind of religion that he's calling us to. You know, so often you'll have people that talk about their Christianity, or you'll observe their Christianity, and it is almost entirely devoid of justice for these groups of people. We talk about all sorts of other things and how our Christianity manifests itself, but rarely does it go after these groups of people in a biblical sense of justice. You could ask, why is it that Christians are not leading the charge for income equality? Why are so few voices being heard from the Christian perspective? Why are we not demanding an end to the incarceration state? Why is it that Christians are quiet when confronted with the ugly truths of institutionalized racism? Where are the Christian voices that will stand up and cry for justice? We're the first to build up walls to keep foreigners out, the last to receive children fleeing from violence-filled countries. Are these no longer foreigners? Worthy of the Christian's care? What happened? When did we lose our voice? One writer puts it like this. He explains this lack in American Christianity as a whole in our gospel. Somehow we've forgotten a key part. We've forgotten what it means to act justly. Now, we can argue all you want about the politics of these things, and you can tell me all the reasons why this isn't good for America and all that, and you might even be right on a few points. I'll grant that. I'm not asking what's right for America, am I? It's not my point. We're citizens of another nation, first and foremost. I'm asking what followers of Christ who are determined to live just and do justly in this world what we would be called to do. Then he tells us to love mercy. This is an important biblical word. It's related to God's covenant. It's that word chesed. Chesed. Now our conspiracy, chesed is loving kindness. It's God's profound kindness to the world in an undeserved way. Now, our conspiracy is coming to an end. These marbles, of course, represent a whole lot of really great acts that you guys have done. Little acts of kindness and little works of forgiveness that you have wrought over the last month or so. Now, just because our conspiracy is coming to an end, it doesn't have to stop. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave these marbles at the door so that on your way out, you get to take one back out. And I want this marble to be with you wherever you decide it's most helpful. Keep it in your pocket with your change if that's your thing. Or you drop it in your cup holder in your car, so every time you put your Frappuccino in there, it hits it, and you remember it. Or you can put it anywhere else, and you just see it every day, valet, or whatever you use, to remind yourself of God's chesed, His mercy, His loving kindness. And that kindness comes with a reciprocity. Often when it shows up, it is God's kindness to us overflowing into the lives of others. That's what I want your Hesed marble to represent for you, to remind you about. You see, God is saying, I have poured out on you Marvel upon marvel upon marvel upon marvel upon marvel of goodness, of mercy, of kindness. I have shown you justice. I have given you kindness. I have poured out blessing upon blessing upon blessing. Where's the overflow? Where's the reciprocity of Hesed? Where is your fight for the hurting, for the helpless, for the hopeless? And if you're unwilling to show Hesed, then one might legitimately ask, one might ask you, have you received Hesed? Because if you've received it, you can't help but give it. You have to. Not because you ought to, but because it flows through you. If you've really experienced God's loving kindness. And then he says to walk humbly. This is to walk consciously. You can see this in Matthew 23. Jesus, it seems, was reflecting on Micah 6:8, believe it or not, I think. And he says, you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, act justly, mercy, love mercy. And instead of walk humbly, he says faithfulness. Well, I think this is Micah 6:8. I think Jesus, in the whole context, feels like it as well. I think he's saying to walk humbly means to walk circumspectly, to walk carefully, to walk faithfully. See, this is the way that God is calling us, not to a life that is arrogant, but one that is attentive, one that is careful, not one that life is just happening to you, but you are happening to life. You are walking with a kind of faithfulness so that at every opportunity you will act justly and love mercy. I think that's what the walk humbly idea means here. We're being warned not to walk carelessly or presumptuously through this life, doing things our way with our time and all that kind of stuff. Now you might have noticed, of course, here that Micah's description of true religion includes no negative statements. There's lots of other sin lists. But his true religion, he's talking about a positive case for what is best for mankind. And I think this is the key to a full and an abundant life. So you can imagine what it would be like to be a people who have found our true religion. All of us together increasingly growing in this as a spiritual family. You know, there would be no hungry people in our church, even fewer in our communities. The financial struggles that so many are facing, they would be eased across the board because people would be living their lives with an open hand. The lonely in our midst, they would have ample friends. Social outcasts would find a home. The hurting here would have shoulders to cry on. This would be mercy and this would be justice. So if we as a church, if we want to reach the next generation, if we want to continue to reach out, not just to grow our church numerically, but to grow in depth of connection, depth of relationship with each other, then we need to accept this challenge. Maybe you want to play a part in helping turn back the tide of sin and immorality that is in our culture. Or maybe you want to help set free the hurting and the helpless and the hopeless. You start by pleading guilty to the charges. That's where it'll start. Allowing God to come in and to soften our hearts, to come before Him with humility, to know that we too can have our hearts break for the hurting, break for the people that are under-resourced, that are struggling through life. We start to do this, then we're going to find our true religion. Just pray with me. Lord, we're asking that you would help us this Memorial Day week to not allow the sacrifices made for us to be squandered. We have been given a unique privilege and even a responsibility to be the kinds of people that will set the captives free, bring hope and joy and peace, confidence, stability, health, wholeness. Many have paid a steep price so that we can do this at this time. Lord, you have poured out upon us blessing upon blessing. I pray that it will soften our hearts. We ask all of it in Jesus' name.